The Violins of Hope San Francisco Bay Area project has been in preparation for the past 3 years. And when we first heard about the Violins of Hope, our organization, Music at Cole Mansion, had no idea what an incredible, huge community event this would become. But 3 years later, here we are with all of you, with 8 weeks of programming all over the Bay Area in 8 counties of the Bay Area, with 42 partner organizations, 3 spectacular exhibitions that we're very proud of, including the beautiful exhibition you have upstairs, and a very large exhibition where the violins themselves are on display in San Francisco at the War Memorial Veterans Gallery, both curated by the wonderful Lisa Cosino. Lisa, where are you? Yes, over there. So we're very, very excited about today's program. The violins are a collection of now 86 or 87 instruments that have been collected by the founders of this project, Amnon and Avshalom Weinstein, who you will hear from in a moment. These are all instruments that were once played by prisoners in concentration camps, in ghettos, in displaced persons camps, in the orchestras that were in the concentration camps, which you'll hear about in a moment as well, and by people who suffered or perished during the Holocaust. These instruments have been collected and lovingly, beautifully restored by this father and son team of violin makers in Tel Aviv, Israel. And they are here today from Israel to share in some of the wonderful work that they have been doing. We have about 51 instruments here in the Bay Area for the duration of the project, so we hope you'll join us. There are many programs. In addition to tonight's beautiful program, we will be in performances, lectures, film screenings, community presentations, and of course the exhibitions. Many schools in the Bay Area as well. So we're really thrilled to be able to share this enormously moving project with a very wide Bay Area community, and we're incredibly gratified by the response of all of you and all of the extraordinary partners that have come forward and audiences that are filling every house. So we are, I look forward to hearing and talking with all of you at the reception and speaking with you. We are one community around the Violins of Hope. Tonight you will hear from 2 beautiful musicians who will be performing on Violins of Hope, so every instrument you will hear played tonight and see is an instrument from the collection. You will hear from founder Amnon Weinstein in a little moment. The performers tonight, Tarley and Sevil Ulucan Weinstein. And I'm now going to turn the microphone over to Avshalom Weinstein, co-founder of the Violins of Hope.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our project. The instruments that you'll see here, a little bit about stories about music during the Holocaust, and also a little bit about my mother's side of the story. But in general, like Patricia mentioned, we have 87 instruments today. 52 actually are here. We got 2 instruments just recently in November. You can see both of them in the exhibition. And the instruments and the collections are growing all the time. Now, unlike museum pieces, which is a great thing, my father is a collector of basically everything you can almost think about. I don't know if any of you have a chance to be in our workshop one day. These kind of white walls don't exist in our workshop, nor in the house where we live. So the thing is that with these instruments, we can also play. Now everybody says, okay, but what do you think? An instrument should be played or should be kept in a museum? For me, both. For a player, only to be played. but we also have to make sure that some of those instruments that we have to keep them in the original shape so people can see what happened to those instruments and also understand what happened to the people who actually played them. One of the instruments that we have, which we chose not to restore, it's in the exhibition, and you can clearly see what a terrible work was done on it, just so the person who owned it can play one more day. If you look on the top of the violin, you see that all the varnish was washed away. The only thing which was left is basically a little bit of color, and the reason for that is because he had to play in rain and snow. Now, who has to play in rain and snow? You do that only if you have to. There was music everywhere. Every camp had at least one orchestra. Auschwitz, that as you might know is basically a series of more than, I think, about 40 camps altogether. Each one had an orchestra. Auschwitz I, during a certain time, had about 120 people symphonic orchestra. It didn't really mean that those who played the morning rehearsal and the evening rehearsals were actually the same people, because many people died, but they had music everywhere. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the first violin that you're going to hear in a few minutes. It's one of the very first instruments that we got, and the story shows you how instruments and how stories can go. On one hand, 1 second they can be lost forever, or in the other second they can be found and kept for many, many years to come. This violin belonged to a Jewish guy from Romania named Fievel. Fievel was born and raised in Romania, and when Romania decided to join the Nazis in the war, the Romanian government was thinking what will be the best way to solve the so-called Jewish Romanian problem. One of their solutions was to expel tens of thousands of Jewish people to a very remote area called Transnistria. Transnistria was a marsh area, there were swamps there. They knew that there is no chance that so many people can live there, and they basically sent them there to die out of starvation. Fievel had to pack his family and go. They lost one family member on the way, and after 2.5 weeks they arrived to the ghetto in Transnistria. They found a place to stay, and later, a few days later, Fievel met a judge that he knew from his hometown, and the judge told him, he said, listen, I have this very old Italian violin, Amati, why don't you take it and play, and if you can earn something, you can come and share it with me and my sisters. So Fievel was very happy. I mean, to get such a violin, it's like someone who's going to come and give you the biggest gift of your life, and he was so happy, even it's in the ghetto. And a few days later, when he had a little bit of extra food to spare for the judge and his sisters, like the deal they've done, he went to their place in the ghetto. But nobody opened the door. In the end, he managed to go in, and he saw that he was too late. The judge and his sisters couldn't bear the conditions anymore and committed suicide. Fievel kept the violin. He would play in small weddings and other things for the locals. Sometimes those weddings could last 2 or 3 days in a row, and his payment would be the leftover of the food, maybe a bit of firewood, clean water, and this is how he and his family survived. Until one day the Romanian police, they heard about this very precious violin. They came to Fievel and they told him something very simple. Either you're going to give us the violin, or we will take away your family. So Fievel had nothing to do. He gave away the violin, and when one of the locals came and said, listen, my daughter heard you in a wedding, she's getting married, she wants you to come and play in her wedding, how can we do that? And Fievel said, well, I mean, I would love to do it, but no violin, no playing. And the guy said, well, that's not a problem. He said, come with me, we can find the violin. They went around the villages, around the ghetto, and they found the violin that you're about to hear. It's a very simple German instrument in a very poor condition. But this was the instrument that Fievel played on. And by being able to play it, he managed to bring enough food and firewood that he and 16 other family members survived. Even his little daughter, who was 1.5 years old when they arrived to the ghetto, survived. And many, many years later, when he was turning 90 years old, his little daughter, Helen, came to her father and said, "Dad, what do you want for your birthday?" And her dad said, "Well, I want to play my violin again, my friend." He used to call his violin my friend. So Helen took her father's violin. She came to our workshop with something which looks like a case with something that might be a violin, and said, "Listen, my father is going to turn 90 years old. He wants to play again. What can I do?" And we took a look on the violin and we said, "Listen, it doesn't make sense to repair it. You're going to spend too much money. Just simply buy him a better violin. It's going to be cheaper and a better instrument." So Helen is very happy. She goes back home, goes to her dad, says, "Dad, I have a much better solution. I'm going to get you another violin, a better violin." And her dad starts crying. He says, "No," he said, "you don't understand. I want to play my violin, my friend." Now here comes the tricky thing. Helen actually knew the story of her father and his violin because she already wrote a book about it. But when she came to us the first time, she never said a word. For her, this was, yeah, I know what it is. It belongs to my father, but that was it. So she came back to us, told us the whole story. We repaired his violin, of course, and you've never seen a happier child than Fievel the day he got his violin back. Now you will hear Hannah playing a Bach, solo Bach, on Fievel's violin.
The Bach movement that I will be doing is from his second sonata. This is the Andante. And what I really find very special and beautiful about playing Bach on this specific instrument is that there's a sense of almost continuity. The movement of Bach, the music of Bach is eternal, absolutely eternal, and it brings kind of this peace to your soul. And there's a sense of a real sense, it's pensive. The music is just so beautiful, and it makes you kind of go into your own thoughts and be with yourself. And playing this specific movement on this instrument, it combines that for me, and I find it a really special experience.
I don't know how many of you heard already a lecture that I gave here, but I'll tell you a little bit about the start of Violins of Hope. So the first, let's say, lecture in a project which was later on became Violins of Hope was in 1999, but the actual beginning was much before that. My grandfather and my grandmother, my father's parents, they immigrated to Israel in 1938 from Vilna, from Lithuania. My grandfather had 11 brothers and sisters. Only one of his brothers survived. My grandmother had 7 or 8 brothers and sisters. We simply don't know because she never talked about them. None of them survived. We lost about 350, maybe even 400 family members. We don't know when, where, and how. We simply know they don't exist anymore. Now, in the 1930s, when Bronislaw Huberman, who was one of the best violinists, a Jewish-Polish musician, when he saw what was going on in Germany and Europe, he believed that Europe is going to go to a big war, and he wanted to try and help Jewish musicians and save Jewish lives. His solution was to establish an orchestra in Palestine, Israel, but this was rather quite a difficult task. The British government wouldn't give certificates for people to come to Israel. He needed money, so he came here to the United States, and with the help of Albert Einstein, they managed to raise enough money to make the orchestra. He had some good friends in the British government who gave him the certificates, but he didn't bring only the musicians. He brought their families alongside them, and basically saving about 1,000 people in total. Now, many of those people came from Germany and Austria. They had very good made German instruments, and you have to remember one thing. German violin and bow makers, the vast majority of them were very good friends. They had very many clients, Jewish clients. Many of them helped Jewish people either by buying their instruments, giving them money, or even keeping them home, at their home, taking a very big risk on themselves and their own families. Now, after 1945, when survivors started coming to Israel and telling about all the thousands of atrocities which happened during the war, nobody wanted to touch anything German in Israel. They wouldn't even say the word Germany in the radio. Many of those people, the musicians, they came to my grandfather, told him something very simple. Told him, either you're going to buy this German instrument from me, or I'm simply going to destroy it. So my grandfather, collector, of course, like my father, and my grandmother and my mother couldn't really keep my father and my grandfather in chains, but my wife does, so we don't have that big connection yet. My grandfather bought whatever he could. He knew that this is basically going to be a collection, because if nobody wants to buy German instruments, how can you sell them? And the instruments stayed for many years in our collection, until in 1991, my father had an apprentice from Dresden, which was just 2 years before that, still Eastern Germany. And this person, Daniel Schmidt, he's coming from a very big family of violin and bow makers. I've been with him in few places around the world, and people would bring us bows and instruments to repair. And he looks on the bow and says, this is my great uncle, and this is my great-grandfather, and blah, 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 blah. So they are in the business for about 250 years. And when Daniel Schmidt came to Israel in 91, don't forget, he came from Eastern Germany. Now, in Eastern Germany, and like all over the Soviet Union, Jewish Holocaust did not exist. They wouldn't talk about it. They wouldn't teach it. Even if you would go in those times to all the camps and massive killing areas, the signs would say, here lies so-and-so Soviet citizens. Never if they were Jewish, Polish, Russians, Gypsies, whatever. Everybody was a Soviet citizen. Now, Daniel met many survivors, don't forget, 1991, and he saw this collection that we have. And he asked my father, he said, how come that in Tel Aviv in the 40s, you could get such instruments. And I don't know if any of you have been to Tel Aviv. I know none of you have been to Tel Aviv in the 40s. So Tel Aviv in the 40s was basically a small hole in the desert. You'll see more camels in the streets than cars, and still you could get such great musicians playing on those great instruments. It took Daniel about 3 or 4 years to convince my father to give the lecture in 1999 to the German Violin and Bow Making Association in Germany. And afterwards, my father spoke on a radio show which was, let's say, post-war Facebook. Why? Because this radio show started very soon after the war. People will go on air saying, my name is this and that, I'm coming for this and that village, I'm looking for my mother, my father, whatever, leaving either a phone number or an address, and this is how people will found out what happened to their families, if anyone else actually knew. And everybody listened to that program. Of course, in 1999 it was a bit different, but my father went on air and said, listen, if you know about stories about musicians and maybe by chance you still have their instruments, please contact us. So the next morning we had a phone call, and this was the first instrument. Today, as we said, we have 87. Now, if you remember just a few minutes ago, I told you there were orchestras in every single camp. So you can imagine how many there are still out there and how many there are unfortunately lost.
I just wanted to say about these two movements. So the first movement is this really somber, very, very beautiful prelude, and the second movement is the gavotte. It's more a happier dance. And I think what's really beautiful about playing these specific instruments on these pieces is that you get to bring these two voices together again, and then you get to kind of bring them together in a dance, and you get to hear them speak and hear them sing.
The story behind this violin is very simple. It belonged to Manfred Katz. Manfred and his wife both lived in Romania, and they tried to run away. It was almost too late. They couldn't really sell their possessions for enough money, and the only thing they could take with themselves was this violin. They had sold everything they had, got just a bit of money for what it's actually worth, bought this violin, and this is the only thing they managed to carry with them all the way to Israel, and the only thing that stayed with them basically until they passed away. This is the violin you just heard, and this is another violin. As you can see in the back, there is these two beautiful stars of David, and this one has these beautiful stars on the front. The stars are made originally with the instruments. It's mother of pearl. Don't worry about photos, will be upstairs. You can take it from very close distance. And all those decorated instruments, the vast majority of them were done in a place called Schweinbach. It was the border between the Czech Republic and Germany. And they made many instruments. Some with stars of David, some with crosses, some with any other ornaments they would think about that day. But all those instruments were basically very, very simple. The vast majority of them belonged to Klezmers, the ones with the Jewish stars of David. And the Klezmers were the Jewish folk musicians in Eastern Europe. It was an extremely, extremely widespread tradition before the war. Almost every Jewish house had a violin, but unfortunately for the Klezmers, they were all of them were self-taught. They didn't know how to read and write notes, so they couldn't play in the orchestras. The vast majority of them stopped playing or were skilled in the camps, and this tradition was basically extinct when the war was finished. Today in Poland they say that there is a revival of klezmer music. I don't think so. It's not even close to what it was. Probably never will be. There is klezmer music here in the United States and in Israel and in other places, but Eastern Europe klezmer music basically does not exist.
So I would like to play 2 Yiddish folk songs for you, and it's really amazing for me to be able to play them on a klezmer instrument. You know, I myself come from a family that lived in Russia and in Belarus, and you know, we have our own story of barely escaping and barely getting someone, barely getting away. And the 2 Yiddish folk songs, the second one was a favorite of my great grandmother's, and it's called Oifen Pipichuk.
I met Amnon first in Turkey, and later on I met Avshi because he was a violin maker. This is how we met and how our friendship started first. But as a musician, later on a nice member of this family, I look at our children. We have 2 children, and I can just look at them and say, I was born in Bulgaria in a Turkish family. One side is from Vilna, the other side is from Belarus, of Avshi, and our children are living now in Turkey. And I just look at them and so much to tell them about where they come from. And tonight we are all here. Yesterday we were at a wonderful concert, remembering and talking about what we should keep on doing not to forget when all the living witnesses are going to leave us all, and how we can find the courage to talk about it would be with their wonderful project. And so many concerts we saw already in San Francisco that they were dedicated to Holocaust. But I want to say one more thing. I was listening and looking at this beautiful crowd. Thank you very much for being here tonight. We will all, of course, have to continue our lives, go home. Maybe after the concert and after the nice conversations we are going to have, we will have to continue somehow. But we will always remember. We will hear these instrument sounds, and we will thank Amnon and Asi and Avshi and Merav and all the family of Weinsteins, and Patricia for her great efforts, and everyone which I cannot name now, and every single of you, because we will have this little memory and we will say, once we were at this beautiful concert, we shared stories. As every day I experience in every different concert I can attend, I feel like we must remember horrible things are continuing in the world. What would we define safe? We were just talking about it the other day. I think safe means that as long as we keep our good heart and goodwill about everyone and everything around us, and start from our little cell to protect and to talk about how important it is to keep our good feelings as a human being, and just to hold on to music, to art, and everything which can describe good harmony in life. Thank you very much to all. I will play a very short Turkish folk song, and then maybe Hannah will complete tonight. And thank you.